Hello and welcome. Our topic today is hallucinogens and culture. We're going to examine the way that various cultures throughout the planet have been influenced in their social and cultural and intellectual development by hallucinogenic substances in the food chain. With me in the studio is Terrence McKenna, author, lecturer, explorer, and philosopher. Terrence is the co-author with his brother Dennis McKenna of a book called The Invisible Landscape, Mind, Hallucinogens, and the I Ching. He's also the co-author of Psilocybin, Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. He is the author of a computer program called Timewave Zero, and he's the co-founder and president of an organization called Botanical Dimensions, which devotes itself to saving botanical plants used in shamanistic traditions throughout the world. Welcome, Terrence.
It's a pleasure to be here. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter which occurs in all life and is most concentrated in the higher primates and most concentrated there in man. It is 5-hydroxytryptamine, while DMT is, as you mentioned, NN-dimethyltryptamine. So there is a very close structural affinity between this extremely potent and exotic hallucinogen and the very common basis for ordinary consciousness, serotonin. That's correct.
Now, other cultures around the world have also used other types of substances. I think it might be interesting to talk, at least briefly, about alcohol, which is referred to so often in the Bible, for example.
Yes, well, we tend in our culture to make a radical distinction between drugs and foods, with what we call spices sort of falling somewhere in the middle. In point of fact, a culture is what it eats, and an individual's personality is often largely a reflection of their diet. There has not been a human culture that did not bear upon it the stamp of its relationship to certain plants which altered the individual and mass psyche. We can think of numerous examples, the influence, for instance, of sugar on the growth of 19th century mercantilism, or the way in which the British manipulated opium policy in the Far East, or, as you mentioned, alcohol, which has always been the drug of choice in Western culture. Who can imagine modern industrial office culture without coffee? These are major drug dependencies that have placed their stamp on the lives of millions and millions of people. It's simply that we choose to linguistically define it in such a way that the effect is not something most people are cognizant of.
I think coffee is a very interesting example because when it was first introduced into our culture, as I understand it, was considered virtually a hallucinogenic drug.
Oh yes, when coffee was first introduced into Western culture, it was associated with certain establishments where loose women and loud music were available, and the bohemian literati would gather and drink coffee and talk into the night, and it was considered quite a risque thing to be involved with. That's right.
It wouldn't be fair really to talk about drugs without mentioning socially what's happened in Western culture, particularly during the 60s and early 70s when there was quite a wave of psychedelic drug use.
Yes, that's right. Following upon the discovery of LSD by Albert Hofmann in the late 30s, and then the writing on the subject of the psychedelic experience that was done by Aldous Huxley, Metzner, and others, it became a fad of the self-exploring youth culture of the 60s to be involved with these things. This was during a time of great social upheaval for other reasons, and the end product of that historical episode was the complete suppression of the study of psychedelic drugs, and in my opinion, to the great detriment of the development of psychology. I feel that potentially psychedelic drugs could be for psychology what the telescope became for the science of astronomy. The problem with the psychedelics is that they dissolve cultural programming and hence inherently have a political charge about them. You see, culture is the product of the unperturbed human mind. The human mind, unperturbed through the medium of language, erects institutions and social structures into which it then secretes itself and sort of lives in a private Idaho. A psychedelic drug will dissolve these linguistic and cultural assumptions. It is a perturbation of the mind, and the perturbed mind is a mind in the act of rediscovering the nature that lies outside of culture. So this tension between cultural values and what we might call, for want of a better word, reality, creates a tension between institutions and the users of these substances.
It's as if our culture, if I understand you right, acts as a filter between our minds and direct experience of reality, and the drugs somehow blow away that crust of culture and allow more of a direct, agnostic experience.
That's right, and the business of culture, any culture, is to perpetuate its cultural models. And if the hallucinogenic plants have not been integrated into the cultural model, then they are definitely seen as dangerous forces for an unpredictable sort of social change.